Emily wasn't trying to listen. She only stopped because she heard her own name. Not loudly, not dramatically, just casually, as if it belonged in that conversation. She was walking back toward the backyard with 2 glasses of lemonade in her hands when she heard Daniel's voice through the half-open kitchen window. I don't think Emily knows. Then a short pause, then someone laughed softly. Emily stopped walking. The strange thing wasn't fear, it was certainty. Because before she even heard the rest, something inside her had already dropped, as if some part of her had been waiting for this without telling her. For a few seconds she stood perfectly still. She could feel cold water from condensation sliding down the side of the glass onto her fingers, but she barely noticed it. The sounds from the backyard suddenly felt far away. Music, plates touching, someone laughing at something near the grill. Everything continued normally, and that felt wrong. Because it suddenly seemed impossible that the world could continue moving normally while something inside her had already started changing. Emily and Daniel had been together for almost 6 years. Nothing about their relationship looked broken. They had routines, Sunday groceries, coffee made exactly the same way every morning, shared passwords, shared furniture, shared silence. People liked being around them because they felt calm, predictable, solid. Emily used to think stability meant safety. She thought love eventually stopped feeling loud and became something quieter, something that sat beside you instead of reaching for you. And for a long time, she believed that was what they had. There were no dramatic changes, no cold distance, no obvious signs. Daniel still kissed her forehead before leaving for work, still sent photos when he saw dogs outside, still remembered small things. Last winter, Emily had casually mentioned wanting a specific book she saw in a store window. 3 weeks later, Daniel had surprised her with it. He remembered details. He always remembered details. Everything looked untouched, which made it harder to explain the feeling Emily had started carrying a few months earlier. Nothing had happened, and somehow something had changed. It wasn't one moment, it was dozens of small things that refused to become evidence. Daniel started pausing before answering simple questions. Not long enough to seem strange, just long enough. Sometimes Emily would tell a story and notice him looking at her with an expression she couldn't understand. Not irritation, not boredom, something else, something distant. Once, she walked into the living room and Daniel immediately locked his phone. But then he smiled normally, asked if she wanted tea. Emily hated herself for noticing things like that, because noticing felt suspicious, and suspicion felt ugly. So she kept explaining everything away. People get tired, people get distracted, people change. That was normal, wasn't it? Then there were smaller things. Daniel used to ask her how her day went and wait through the entire answer, even when she talked too much. Lately, she would realize halfway through a story that he was nodding without actually hearing her. Once, Emily stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence just to see what would happen. Daniel looked at her and smiled, then said, "And then what happened?" as if she had never stopped. She remembered laughing, pretending it felt funny, pretending that small moment hadn't stayed with her for the rest of the day. Months passed like that. Tiny moments, tiny discomforts, tiny lies she told herself because they hurt less. Until the afternoon at Daniel's friend's house, until the kitchen window, until she heard, "Sometimes I think staying is harder than leaving." Silence. Then another voice. "Then why are you still with her?" Emily forgot about the glasses in her hands. One slipped, hit the ground, shattered. The sound felt unnaturally loud. Conversation stopped. Someone near the backyard turned around. For a second, nobody moved. Emily remembers that part very clearly. Not who opened the door, not Daniel saying her name, not someone asking if she was okay. What she remembers is Daniel's face. Because he didn't look guilty, he looked sad. And somehow that hurt more. Because guilt meant mistake. Sadness meant truth. Later that night, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, except for the refrigerator humming somewhere behind them. Emily had never noticed that sound before. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she finally asked, "How long?" Daniel looked confused. "How long what?" Emily stared at him. "How long have you been leaving without actually leaving?" Daniel lowered his eyes, and for a few seconds there was nothing. No defense, no explanation, no denial. Then quietly he said, "I don't know." Emily thought anger would come. She expected it, expected shouting, expected something sharp. Instead, she felt something much quieter, something worse. Because suddenly she understood. There wasn't another woman. There wasn't some secret life. Daniel hadn't fallen in love with someone else. He had simply stopped arriving emotionally a long time ago, and Emily had been living beside his absence without realizing it. The next few weeks felt strangely normal. Daniel still lived there, still worked, still asked if they needed groceries, still folded laundry, still put her phone on charge if he noticed the battery was low. The apartment looked exactly the same, but now Emily noticed things she couldn't unsee. How silence stretched too long. How Daniel looked tired all the time. How both of them kept acting out routines that suddenly felt borrowed, like actors forgetting why they were still in a scene. Nobody said they were ending things. Nobody said they weren't. Days kept moving anyway. A month later, Emily woke up in the middle of the night and walked into the kitchen for water. Daniel was asleep on the couch. The television was still on. Blue light moved quietly across the walls. She stood there for a moment, just looking at him. 6 years. 6 years sitting quietly in one room. 6 years of learning someone. 6 years of thinking love disappeared loudly. Emily turned off the television and pulled a blanket over him. Her hand paused for a second near his shoulder, because part of her almost touched him. Almost. Then she stepped back and stood there 1 second longer than necessary. Because the hardest thing wasn't realizing someone had changed. It was realizing they had changed slowly enough for you to stay and call it normal. If this story felt familiar, there are more like it here.